All right, so you know the deadlift is trained 3 days a week in the novice linear progression for 1 set of 5. But what happens when the deadlift becomes too heavy to train 3 days a week? Well, you switch to training it 2 days a week. What happens when it becomes too heavy to train 2 days a week? You switch it to training 1 day a week. And what happens when you get to the end of your novice linear progression, you're training the deadlift 1 day per week for a set of 5 or 2 sets of 3, and that no longer works. So the weight on the bar stops going up. Well, the answer is you transition to a partial movement, which is the rack pull. So at the end of your novice linear progression, you will transition to the rack pull for a set of 5, and that will be considered your heavy pulling day. Since the rack pull is a partial movement, you'll be able to rack pull more than you can deadlift, and there's a few things to keep in mind to execute a correct rack pull. So our model here, John Dowdy, will demonstrate for us. It's the same setup as the deadlift. In terms of bar height, you want the barbell mid-shin. There are various heights you can set it at, depending on your progression, but when you're transitioning from the deadlift to the rack pull, from a novice to an intermediate, I recommend that you start with a mid-shin rack pull. If you notice, the bar will be slightly closer to his legs than it will be at the bottom position of a deadlift, and that's because the bar is further up in the movement artificially, based on it being positioned in the rack. The rack pull is an overload movement, so you want to use straps. If you don't have to strap or use a mixed grip, it's too light and you've moved to the rack pull prematurely. And of course, John is using the straps the way that we recommend, so instead of putting the end through the loop and putting a noose around your wrist, which puts too much tension on the wrist and allows you to be lazy with your grip, he's using them the way we recommend. We'll link to a video that shows you how to use the straps, the starting strength style. So John, go ahead and strap up to the bar. And since this is an overload movement, we're going to go head to toe and make sure everything's perfect. So first of all, like on all of our lifts, John needs to be in balance. His foot needs to be in balance from heel to toe and from side to side. He shouldn't be in his heels, he shouldn't be on his toes. He's going to set his gaze roughly 15 feet in front of him. And then he's going to use the weight in his hands to set his back. Your spine needs to be in a normal anatomical position. When you bend over to grab the bar, your spine's in flexion. So John is going to use the weight in his hands to pull his back flat. That's a perfectly safe pulling position. Be careful though, it's possible to overextend your spine, especially if you've got a super bendy spine, you're female, you're super skinny. So in addition to using the weight in his hands to pull his back flat, John is also going to squeeze his abs. He's going to try to eat his belt to stabilize his spine from both sides. So setting your back isn't just pulling up with your hands to set your back, but it's also squeezing your abs so you have support of your spine from either side. So John, go ahead and set your back. And then he's going to push hard on the floor and stand all the way up. This is a light weight for John. You'll notice the bar came up pretty easily. You may find that you're pushing on the floor for several seconds before the bar breaks up off the pins, and that's because this is an overload movement. When you start rack pulling, just keep in mind that it's going to be heavy and you may have to push on the floor as hard as you can for several seconds before the bar breaks off the pins. So you might be asking yourself, okay, there's a standard template for the novice linear progression. It's a good idea to transition to a mid-shin rack pull after the deadlift stops going up once a week. And then the next question might be, well, what do you do after the rack pull? And the answer to that is just, it varies. So the novice linear progression is standard. It applies to basically everybody with some modifications for certain circumstances. Once you get to intermediate programming, it becomes very individual specific, and you or your coach have to manipulate the training variables so that you're not overstressing and you can recover from the workout, and you're providing adequate stress to produce a strength adaptation. Training effectively means managing stress effectively so you can recover from that stress and produce a strength adaptation. That's very basic and straightforward when you're new, your first several months of lifting, following the template, but it gets more complicated as time goes on, and that's a great reason to have a coach. If you'd like to get an online coach, go to onlinecoaching.ssgyms.com. We can help you anywhere in the world. If you live near one of our gyms, just go to ssgyms.com to find a location, and you can join us for a free 30-minute coaching session. Thank you.